This program is rated 14+ and contains scenes of violence and mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Today, police mounted units covered parks and ravines. Dozens of officers covered every square inch of land for blocks away.
With a small child, I mean, you could take them from the building in a suitcase. It's that simple.
I want this person who has Nicole to please let her go. She's innocent.
I would appeal to anyone who knows the whereabouts of my daughter Nicole to please come forward and let the police know. Please, if you know something about or the whereabouts of Nicole, please come forward.
You expand out, talking to friends that could be someone that has connection to the family, a neighbor, co-worker, friend, that sort of thing, someone that the child knew. This was an anomaly. Kids don't just go missing.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Brobart. Tonight, it started with a trip to the outdoor pool, but one child never showed up. Hours passed before anyone even realized she was missing. Now, the search for the 8-year-old sparked one of the largest missing persons cases in Toronto police history. And decades later, investigators remain determined to solve the mystery of Nicole's disappearance. Here now is Karen Lieberman with Finding Nicole Morin.
What do you remember the summers being like as a kid here?
They were lovely. I mean, there's just such a great atmosphere, so much to do here, lots of trees, lots of nature, and we hung out at the pool obviously a lot.
And just spent hours in the pool, right? Splashing around and jumping in.
Oh, we wouldn't even keep track of time, you know.
Growing up, Melissa Alaschuk and her best friend Nicole would spend hours playing around their apartment building.
We would either meet up at her apartment or she would come down to mine, or we'd meet, you know, in the lobby outside the elevator. And there was never any concern. It was always, hey mom, I'm going to meet up with Nicole and this is where we're going to be going. And, you know, there wasn't even a, what time are you going to be back? And we didn't even have watches on. Like, it was just that relaxed and fun.
It was the 80s, an era of freedom and unstructured fun for kids. Melissa's best friend, Nicole Morin, lived up in the penthouse.
I got to know Nicole just from hanging out. Nicole and I would walk to school together every day. She was 1 year older than myself.
So when school let out for summer, in 1985, Melissa looked forward to spending sun-filled days with Nicole.
I just remember we laughed a lot, you know. We were like two peas in a pod.
So what we know is it was Tuesday, July 30th. That morning, Nicole had made plans with one of her girlfriends to meet in the lobby at 11 a.m. She had a quick lunch, and then, wearing nothing but her bathing suit and canvas shoes, she walked out the door and said bye to her mom. Now, what had happened is her friend did go to the lobby as planned. Did she get there before 11? Did she get there a little bit after 11? That's unclear, but her friend did show up. She waited around for a few minutes, didn't see Nicole, called up to the apartment. Nicole's mother answered, and she's basically, I'm here waiting for Nicole. Her mother didn't think anything of it because she figured, oh, she must have got distracted, ran into a friend in the hallway or in the elevator, and she just basically said, well, don't worry about it, she'll be along. So her friend waited a little bit longer, and then she decided, okay, I'm just gonna go to the swimming pool. Maybe we misunderstood each other. Maybe she just went directly there. Didn't think anything of it, just figured, okay, I guess she changed her mind. Her mother had a daycare at that time, so you can imagine her mother didn't have any freedom to go out. She was stuck in the apartment. It's not until dinner time that Nicole's mother starts realizing that she hasn't come home for dinner yet.
I'm not criticizing anybody, but those hours are critical. The longer it is from the time of the incident until we find out about it, you know, the colder the trail.
She starts calling other families in the apartment, and no one has seen her. She wants to rush out and start looking for herself, but she still has a couple of kids in her apartment. She ends up calling some friends to start going looking for her, go to the playground, go check out the hallways, the apartments. Once they exhausted all of that, the realization set in that we have to call the police. And so police weren't called until about 6 p.m.
We got the description of what she was wearing, but that was it. And at that time, there was no reports of anybody seeing her.
Police say they have nothing tangible to go on, which could help them find Nicole Morin, and police fear the worst: child abduction. Nicole is 4 feet tall, weighs 52 pounds, has shoulder-length brown hair and brown eyes. Anyone with information is asked to call their nearest police department.
We're getting as much information as we can and trying to follow as many leads as we can, and I just hope that we'll find Nicole Morin pretty soon.
Police weren't the only ones called to the scene. Local media were also becoming aware of Nicole's disappearance.
I got to the apartment building the next morning, which is what the editor asked me to do, was start my shift there.
Toronto Star crime reporter Cal Miller was assigned the story.
The police were moving in and out. They didn't seal it up. The parents had been awake all night. They needed somebody there. They were alone. They were desperate.
One thing as we drove up to the building, and I thought, there's thousands of people here, hundreds of cars, and the possibilities are endless as to what could have happened.
When I went into the home, the parents started telling me about their daughter. The mom, Jeanette, was explaining they said goodbye, kissed and such. What I remember telling me that. And she watched her get into the elevator and leave. And that was the last time she saw her. The important thing was I had to get that message out because there was a girl missing and the public needed to know.
We didn't have 24/7 news media there. You had to wait to get pictures out. We did not have an Amber Alert system back then. None of these things existed back in 1985.
Dozens of police officers went door to door in the building today, questioning tenants.
I'm here to check on this missing girl.
Did you hit every single apartment? Was there somebody home in every apartment?
Because she could be anywhere.
She could, yeah.
I looked out the window when there was helicopters there, and I looked and said, oh my God, this is really, full force here.
You had a knock on the door. Police were there. What did they say?
They came in here, asked questions, went through the whole apartment, looked in cupboards. I said, absolutely, no problem. Please come in and go wherever you need to go.
Desperate to find his daughter, Art Morin makes a public appeal for help.
I would appeal to anyone who knows the whereabouts of my daughter Nicole to please come forward and let the police know. Please, if you know something about or the whereabouts of Nicole, please come forward.
Within those several hours that we have where she's unaccounted for, the question is, where was she last seen?
A cleaner in the building, Dave Hannigan, saw her minutes before she disappeared.
The time was about a little after 10:30, and she was standing in the lobby. It appeared that she was either waiting for someone or just dressed in the bathing suit, and I was called up to go upstairs to work after cleaning the elevators, and that was the last time I saw her.
Could somebody have known the swimming routine?
Anyone was watching the building or lived in the building or worked in the building, they would know that these kids go unattended to the swimming pool.
There's storage rooms in the basement, checking typically the garbage rooms and the garbage bins and looking for anything out of the ordinary.
The most startling thing about this case, there was no clue. There was no scene to examine.
This was an anomaly. Kids don't just go missing.
Welcome back. It was July 1985 when an 8-year-old girl vanished, taking an elevator down from her high-rise apartment. She had intended to meet a friend to go for a swim. Now, as police struggled to find a single clue, this quickly became one of the largest and most extensive searches in Toronto police history. We now return to Karen Lieberman with Finding Nicole Morin.
Today, police mounted units covered parks and ravines. police dogs were used. Dozens of officers covered every square inch of land for blocks away.
So all those areas have to be checked, and they all were checked. But there's not the, fine examination for DNA trace and things like that. That didn't happen.
If you find a hair or you find anything in that hallway, at the time we didn't have DNA evidence, so you wouldn't have known if it was Nicole's or if it was somebody else, because those hallways, the elevators, it had all been so well traveled. You're kind of flying blind.
At some point they set up even like a roadblock for people leaving the garage or leaving the driveway to check their cars.
With a small child, basically you could take them from the building in a suitcase. It's that simple. The hours that they had from the time of the abduction to the time the incident was reported gave them so much opportunity.
Everything is so confined. Remember that there's fridges, there's steamer trunks, there's drawers, there's closets. We have to check everywhere possible where a child may hide, or the other way, that somebody else may hide her.
It was a series of apartment buildings close to one of the major highways in Toronto, which is the 427 highway, and it runs past the Toronto Pearson Airport.
Who's to say that something didn't happen and jumps on a flight? Luggage isn't checked. It is now, but on domestic flights in that time, you went anywhere you wanted to.
Jeanette Morin hadn't slept in days, but today, after her first sleep, she felt rested enough to call in the media to hear her plea.
I want this person who has Nicole to please let her go. If I did anything wrong to that person, I'm sorry. She's innocent.
Who were some of the persons of interest?
First and foremost that you always look at are going to be those closest to her. You're going to look at the mother, you're going to look at the father, you're going to look at anybody that was close to her. Issues with the child themselves or issues within the parental relationship.
The mother and father in this case were separated, so could it have been a parental abduction? There have been cases where one parent would do something to the child to either get back at the other parent or to attract the other parent back. Father was not there, so we had to trace his movements.
Do you remember where Art Morin was?
Yeah, he's a delivery driver, and he was on a route, and we had the investigators check that route out, and he was on that route. Yeah, somebody saw him at a place some distance away at the time.
You expand out, talking to friends. That's the next stage. It could be someone that has connection to the family, a neighbor, co-worker, friend, that sort of thing, which would be considered someone that the child knew or ought to have known or knew of the child.
Veteran investigator Gary Donovan says someone who knew Nicole may have been waiting for the perfect opportunity to abduct her.
Do you feel she left the building still alive?
Yes, we were under that assumption that she did in fact leave the building alive, probably with somebody who she was conversant with.
Someone who knew her may be responsible.
Yes, we believe that's a very good theoretical approach now.
To help jog someone's memory, police release a sketch of Nicole, what she was wearing and carrying the day she went missing.
She was carrying a white plastic shopping bag, and she had some articles of clothing in it. So that's important to know, because in case we just find the bag somewhere.
In the sketch, she has a different hairstyle from the one she has in a photograph released earlier. And Nicole is shown wearing the orange swimsuit and bright green headband she had on when she disappeared.
It's one woman who lived in the building thought she saw her at the 6th floor elevator. Another person thought they saw her around the back of the building.
So you have a 90% chance of it being someone that is known to either the victim or the family, and a 10% chance that it's just a random unknown stranger. The stranger on stranger type of a scenario.
While police searched the area, detectives questioned known child molesters and interviewed other tenants in the building.
The usual suspects, like there's, unfortunately a number of sex offenders in areas, and, pedophiles, known pedophiles, so they would all be accounted for. and hopefully alibied. That's the kind of suspects that you initially have. But there was no evidence directing towards any one person.
The sketch police have produced is of a blonde woman who they describe as 35 to 37 years old, 5'5" to 5'7".
And we're attempting to locate this woman strictly as a witness to ascertain if she saw something that the other people who we have already interviewed did not see.
I think it was probably a reporter moving in and out, and there was nothing else.
As apartments are searched in the complex where Nicole lived, they are checked off a master list at the police command post. Some officers remain convinced that someone in the building, or very familiar with the area, someone Nicole trusted, is responsible.
And I want to beg this person to make an anonymous call to whoever he feels comfortable with, whether it be Crime Stoppers or Child Find, or any newspaper or radio or television, to end this ordeal.
I'm going to mention something to you here as well. Jeanette told me she had a son, and he went missing. And he showed up as an adult in the middle of the search.
No.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes.
When had he gone missing? Like he ran away, or?
I never talked to him, and they said we don't want to talk about it, and please don't write about it.
And so when did she tell you that, and what was that like?
Second day, and she told me because she'd heard from him and he's going to show up, and I'm hoping the police had talked to him. I never had the opportunity. I'm hoping the police did, and I'm hoping that they were able to clear anything that evidence that he may have been able to provide. That's the one thing that bothers me about this case.
When you were looking at family members, did you ever come across a brother?
A son of Jeanette's from a previous relationship. I remember hearing about that, but it's not in my notes and wasn't pertinent at the time, or I wasn't known at the time. So it was sometime later that, and I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of strange.
Because every relative would have been investigated.
Oh yeah.
Nicole's half-brother is now deceased. He would have been in his early 30s that summer, significantly older than Nicole.
Art, I think, told me that he had been with a family member, and it always bothered me if Nicole had ended up the same way.
We were able to contact one of the half-brother's daughters, who said her father wasn't missing, information corroborated by Toronto police. Rather, he had a family of his own in southern Ontario, and that they would even visit the West Mall apartment from time to time.
Did Art say anything about it?
He was aware that the son existed.
In an interview with local media, Art said he'd traveled to California with a private detective in 1986 to confront Jeanette's ex-husband about kidnapping Nicole, but Art admitted he didn't have anything conclusive tying him to the disappearance.
In this case, the family was not involved.
There's no evidence of that. No.
1 year later, police have reduced the team searching for her, so her father has launched his own campaign to keep up the search independently of a police force he says has failed him.
The onus fell on me to do something to find my daughter, because if I didn't do it, not much else would have been done. So the Nicole Morin Trust Fund was established, and from there we raised enough funds to be able to hire what I call a child locator because of his track record. I think you'll find Nicole.
We have very strong feeling she may be still alive, but it's a possibility that she is dead. And that means there's somebody on the loose out there, and that person could strike again.
There were also friends of the family who, for one reason or another, and that's the strange comment that she made that day about whoever it was, as though there was something in her mind about a person who may have done it.
If I did anything wrong to that person, I'm sorry.
Now, the sad part is she died a number of years ago, and whatever information she knew, she took to her grave.
3,000 flyers will be distributed this week to police forces around the province with a watercolor painting of Nicole on the cover in the bathing suit she was wearing when she disappeared.
We had a hotline set up where people could phone in. Several people who claimed to be psychics call in.
Brampton psychic Alfred Ward said he had strong vibrations that searchers would turn up something today and even pinpointed the location on a map.
This is the area that I want to concentrate on. If she's not here, they'll probably find something of hers in this area.
And you solved a lot of cases?
Yes, I have.
If this man has something, it's to be proved, and he feels that this is where Nicole is. It's been 2.5 months that Nicole hasn't turned up, so I feel the search has to carry on today to either prove or disprove this man.
What you're saying is you and your wife just haven't given up hope.
We haven't given up hope. I haven't given up hope of finding Nicole alive. So I'm here today probably looking for a dead girl.
Every tip that came in was followed up.
More investigation, Constable Spires.
There was one in Mississauga. It was about a male that was seen carrying a small girl across the front lawn of a house.
There was somebody that came forward and said there was a strange man with a beard holding a girl's hand that looked like Nicole in the park across the street.
Frustrating?
It's frustrating, yeah, but you have to follow up on them.
And there was one thing from Nicole herself that captured the attention of detectives.
We had her school book, the journal that she was writing in, and she wrote something that was a little bizarre. She wrote, "I feel like I'm going to disappear." And I mean, speaking to her friends at the time, they all considered her a very happy-go-lucky child. So I don't know where that comment would have come from, but it was in one of her journals. And that is a little weird, but other than that, nothing else has come up that was sort of shady, one could say.
2 separate pictures have been circulated through the media. Today, the people at Crime Stoppers brought out another poster of Nicole. It was unveiled at a bus shelter and will appear in shelters across the country.
At the time I was involved with Crime Stoppers, it was a brand new program that had just started in Toronto.
All of Toronto was, where is this little girl? We need to help find her, right? So now you introduce Crime Stoppers as a new mechanism to help the police and make sure that people remain anonymous.
There have been several reenactments of the day Nicole disappeared.
So here you see Nicole leaving an apartment, walking down the hall, getting to the elevator, and then entering the elevator, and she disappears. It's bringing people back to that moment. Did you see this little girl in the hallway, in the elevator, in the lobby? Come forward with the information. And then hopefully someone will remember and be like, hey, wait a minute.
And that triggered the memory of someone that lived in a small town, a farming town north of Barrie. She called Crime Stoppers.
It was 2014, nearly 3 decades since Nicole's disappearance, but it was not the first time this woman had reached out.
She's like, you know what, that's always bothered me. It never sat well with me.
It was likely one of the early tips that investigators had received.
It went unnoticed for years and years and years.
Ontario Provincial Police near Barrie, Ontario, about 100 kilometers north of Etobicoke, get a call from a mother and daughter.
Nicole went missing July 30th. This is now August 1st. This is 2 days later. They were going out to feed the horses in the barn. And as they were walking along, they heard what they described as a young girl screaming, "Please stop. I won't tell anyone, leave me alone," kind of thing, to the point where both of them stopped frozen. And then they heard this scream, which frightened both of them. And they both looked at each other and they said, "That's the girl from Toronto." Immediately, they called their local police service. At the time, they did send an officer who just sort of kind of drove up and down the road, and the officer did come and speak to them, but basically had them convinced that they must have heard an animal. It didn't go any further than that, and they didn't think to call Toronto.
Fast forward to 2014, when the woman decided to call again.
And kudos to the investigator at the time, took it very seriously, and there were no other reported missing children in Ontario at the time. So who is this girl that two people heard screaming, right? And the investigator also went up and interviewed some people living there. And one other older woman now corroborated. She's like, yeah, I remember hearing that scream. The 22 Division did the best that they could do, but they don't always have the time and the resources that a specialized squad did. I actually sought this case and I lobbied for it because I wanted to have an opportunity to look at it with a different lens and with a different knowledge base and more resources.
In May of 2022, Detective Stella Karras assembled a search team and revisited the site in Springwater Township, north of Barrie.
They were using ground-penetrating radar. We can do this better. So we had probes that could go about 6 feet down, and you walked in a line and everybody probed the ground, and then you had to give it a couple of hours to allow whatever scents were down in the ground to come up, and then allow the cadaver dogs to go through and do their thing. The property in question was abandoned at the time, where maybe somebody could have taken somebody to and been left alone. And we spent a week and we covered it as best we could, and we were going to give up, and two different dogs showed interest in the same similar area. And they're trained to smell decay, specifically human. We're on our last day. We had the cadaver dogs go through. Two different dogs showed an interest. We need to set up pulleys, we need to have screens because you've got to sift through the sand. If we were lucky enough to discover bone, it could look like rock.
The search was part of the newly formed Project Finnick for Find Nicole.
We dug and sifted. We didn't find anything until, again, the last day, the forensic anthropologist, he goes, I'm just going to go for a walk. And all of a sudden he's screaming my name. And I'm like, what? And he's like, look. He goes, this has been dug before. So we brought a few officers and they started digging. Somebody dug their shovel in and pulled out a piece of bone. And we were all we're like, oh my God. And then a dog collar came up with it.
So that was the end of the dig?
That was the end of the dig, right. It's such a disappointing ending, but I mean, you have to try. It was a long shot. It was a needle in a haystack, but we tried. We did our best.
Where does your mind go when you think about it and all the possibilities?
I believe that she was abducted. I don't believe that she is still alive. You can't discount it, because I said we don't have evidence one way or the other. There have been a couple of people over the years that have come forward believing that they are Nicole Morin, just, claiming that they don't have much memory of their childhood, etc.
Including one woman who reached out to me.
I reached out to you a couple years ago because a woman in California emailed me and thought she could be Nicole Morin. And you took it seriously.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to take every piece of evidence in this seriously. So we looked into this lady. We did as much background as we possibly could. But in the end, we collected her DNA and we were able to say definitively that she is unfortunately not Nicole Morin.
She'd reached out after I went and met Nicole's father on the 30th anniversary of her disappearance.
This is the familiar photo, I think, that was given to the media.
For 30 years now, Art Morin has looked at this photo every morning when he wakes up and every night before he goes to sleep. For most, 1985 feels like a lifetime ago, but for this father, it often seems like yesterday.
11 o'clock, she left the apartment, and Jenny was supposed to meet her in the lobby. She never arrived, and I got a call from my wife, and she says Nicole's not here. It's like somebody hits you with a sledgehammer and you say, wow, what is going on?
Art remembers vividly getting that call, also getting in his car and rushing here to 627 the West Mall in Etobicoke. He says when he got here, there were already dozens of police officers, but no answers. As for Art, Nicole lives in his memories and in his pictures.
Her long, long hair.
Like the one he keeps in his wallet, it's been there all these years. Nicole's best friend was one of the last people to learn the news of her disappearance.
I went away to see some family late July, and when I came back from the trip, my mom let me know what happened. Oh, everything changed. We had a really carefree childhood. It was just, where's the next fun going to come from? What are we going to do later? Where are we going to hang out?
Did you venture off that property?
No, we didn't. We stayed there because there was so much to do there. As a child, I was not concerned at all about what could happen. I just don't think it was really a concern back then at all.
Maybe not for the children growing up in that time.
The cases bring back memories of shock, fear, horror.
But the headlines told a different story.
July 1977, 12-year-old shoeshine boy Emmanuel Jacques is found brutally murdered above a downtown Toronto massage parlor. May 1980, 6-year-old Lizzie Tomlinson, abducted from outside her home, days later found dead, murdered. January 1983, Sharon Morningstar Keenan, 9 years old, sexually assaulted, found murdered in a freezer. The hunt continues for her killer. October 1984, the town of Queensville searches for Christine Jessup. The little girl cycled to a store to buy candy. Found dead on New Year's Eve in a field miles away.
We talked about the fact that it is an anomaly. This was an anomaly. And yet, things were happening in the early 80s.
Yes, there were other child murders that happened in, I would say, like a 10-year span between, the early 80s and the early 90s.
Little girls.
Little girls, all around the same age, 9, 10, 11, 12, within that short time frame.
It was a strange time. In Toronto, children had gone missing, so it was something that was happening.
Okay, everybody start forward, please.
Most of those cases, if not all of them now, other than Nicole's case, have been solved or I would say resolved. I think there is a possibility that there could be a connection between one case and Nicole.
We're here to try and help Mr. and Mrs. Morin if we possibly can, to give them support and also to help look for their little Nicole.
One of the people assisting in the search is Janet Jessup, whose daughter Christine was murdered last year.
The timelines between the two cases and the similarities between the two cases, in particular the victims, are very close in nature.
The 9-year-old Queensville girl vanished in October of 1984. 2 months later, she was found raped and stabbed to death.
At the time, the Jessups believed their daughter's killer had already been caught.
Detectives made the arrest last night, 25-year-old Nicole Morin.
However, the case would result in one of the most high-profile wrongful convictions in Canadian history. The last name Morin, just a coincidence.
Her neighbor, Nicole Morin, was charged and convicted. Then 10 years after the killing, Morin was cleared through DNA evidence.
The Jessup family left without answers as to who killed Christine.
Christine's body was found in January of 1985, and Nicole went missing in July of 1985. So we're talking 6 months. I can comfortably say from my own opinion that the person that we now know that murdered Christine Jessup could possibly be responsible for Nicole Morin's disappearance. I think there is a possibility of that.
It's a case that has haunted Southern Ontario for nearly 40 years. Tonight, we know who committed this horrific crime. Karen Lieberman is live in our newsroom. Karen.
Alan, his name is Calvin Hoover, and he knew Christine Jessup and her family, and if Calvin Hoover were alive today, he'd be arrested and charged with her murder.
The person responsible turned out to be an acquaintance of the Jessup family. He was a person that worked with Christine's father, and they both kind of worked in the telecommunications industry at the time, whether it's phone cables or cable TV cables, that would give someone access to a building and potentially commit an abduction at that point in time.
It is suspicious. He did live in Toronto at the time of Nicole Morin's disappearance. He could have been a tradesperson that might have been working at the building, because that building was going to get a surveillance system set up, but it hadn't been done yet.
With Christine Jessup, he would have known Christine and been able to talk to her and easily convince her to go with him. And then fast forward to Nicole, maybe he's got that confidence now, same physical description really to some extent as Christine, come down the elevator in a bathing suit, on her own, nobody around, and he took an opportunity. But he changed potentially his tactic in the end of what he would do. He knew within 3 months Christine's body was found. Did he want that to happen again? So he wasn't really worried about the DNA at that time because it didn't exist. He was more worried just about a body being recovered. If this is a case.
Now, the process of just how investigators were able to identify Calvin Hoover as the killer is complex and new to law enforcement in Canada. Hoover died by suicide in 2015, identified via genetic genealogy, a forensic technique that combines DNA analysis with genealogical research.
As soon as we identified him, we did everything in our power to look and see if he was involved in the Morin case at all. We found no links between the cases, unfortunately.
So we never found any record of Calvin Hoover having worked at the apartment building, but it was a possibility. And you know, usually a pedophile doesn't stop at one situation, but he's deceased and we can't question him.
And with no forensics, no DNA from a crime scene to test, none of these scientific advancements can help in Nicole's case. At least not yet.
Welcome back. Nicole Morin was just 8 years old when she vanished in 1985. Decades later, the mystery endures, fueling endless speculation. Was she intercepted in the elevator? Was she already deceased by the time police were called? Could she still be alive? Here now is Karen Lieberman with the conclusion of finding Nicole Morin.
Tell me about your passion for doing this.
When I started this, I loved the idea of just going out into the world and solving a big mystery. But then I started to connect with the families, and it became seeing the pain on their faces.
Please Bring Me Home is a Canadian nonprofit whose volunteers look into missing persons cases.
And in our case, we have located 38 people, which we're very proud of that number, and that's 38 families that have received closure. On a blog, I found a woman who had claimed that not only did she know who took Nicole, but where, and had seen Nicole with this person on the day of Nicole's disappearance here in Marie Curtis Park in Etobicoke. And we came to this park. She showed me around where she had seen the person, and that's where we started our search.
Which was right down here.
Right down here.
And this recent tip involved a name already familiar to investigators. What did she tell you about the man who was with the girl that she identified as being Nicole?
She said that she recognized that man as Calvin Hoover, who of course is famous as being the perpetrator of the Christine Jessup murder. She said she had yelled to them and they had turned around and that Calvin Hoover yelled to her to go home. That's what she remembers. So this was the starting point of our search here.
Show me where in this area specifically the dogs indicated to their handlers like, hey, we've got something. It was somewhere around here.
Absolutely. Just past these bushes right here in a little depression past them, very thick foliage. They went in there and indicated in that spot that they were smelling something, which is, in this case, human remains. So we went in there to look for everything that we could find, and we did not come up with any hits.
One of those people willing to help is Nicole's best friend, Melissa, who grew up without her.
I think I had a pretty normal childhood after that. We moved and went through school and high school and post-secondary, and then I decided to become a police officer.
Did you ever look into Nicole's case?
Over the years, I did speak with various different officers that were assigned to it. Unfortunately, I really didn't have much to add to the investigation because I was away at the time. But anything that I can do to continue to keep Nicole's memory and her name top of mind, I have done and will continue to do.
What keeps you going and motivates you?
Just the hope that we'll have answers one day.
When was the last time you were in this building?
The last time I was here was actually when we had a press conference for the 40th anniversary of Nicole's disappearance. The Toronto Police Service has tried to keep this in front of mind so that we could get people to come forward, refresh some memories. You never know when that tip is going to come that could break the case.
Today marks the 40th anniversary of the disappearance of 8-year-old Nicole Morin.
Police are offering a $50,000 reward for information that could lead them to Nicole, and they've released an updated age-progressed image showing what Nicole might look like today.
My heart of hearts, I believe she's still alive. And God, I hope that she's found.
If this was your child or a child that meant a lot to you, you wouldn't stop caring. I believe that hope is about taking action and never stopping and never giving up. I've seen the impossible become possible when it comes to missing children cases that are long-term. And it always comes down to the same thing. Police haven't closed this case, they're still searching.
I think now it's either getting better technology where maybe one day you can just drag something across the ground and it could just automatically show you, oh, there's bones here or there's clothing here or something. We're not there yet.
With the conclusion of that search, does that finalize that tip for you?
No.
Still bothers you?
It still bothers me. It really does. If that was Nicole and her remains were buried there, we still could have missed it because so much time went by. It's very, very hard. Maybe she's not there, but she could still be there and we just didn't find her.
Does it still weigh on you?
Yeah, it does. It really does. I want to find her. I want to solve this. I want to bring peace to her family. If she is found deceased, which I believe she will be, bury her properly.
Did you think it would be solved?
Yes. Yeah, I am surprised. Like when you called me, I thought it had been resolved, so you were coming to get the background for the resolved case.
The newspaper played a very large role in this. I wanted that story to remain alive forever.
It was really touching to come here in July to recognize the 40th anniversary of her disappearance and to see that the building had put together this bench, just in memory of her. I think the in-loving memory is more that she was very loved and that she's still loved, and the memories are good and the hope is still there that she will be found. I think in this case it's very much an expression of love, but boy, would I like to create new memories with her. And it's kind of surreal seeing her name right there and it being so close to the pool, so close to the building, but really the sense of community is very touching. I do believe that there are people that know more than maybe they even realize they know. I am absolutely certain that there are additional clues out there. I'm hopeful that with the amount of time that has passed, that people will be willing to come forward and have that courage.
While Nicole's mother didn't live long enough to learn the truth about what happened to her daughter, Nicole's father, Art, continues to wait for news. After years of fighting to keep Nicole's case alive, he has stepped out of the public spotlight. The investigators we spoke with hope to one day be able to contact him with the news he's been waiting for. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.
This program is rated 14+ and contains scenes of violence and mature subject matter. Viewer discretion is advised.
Emergency to require police, fire, or ambulance.
I had three gunshots.
Can you get someone, please? Okay, sir, listen, we're going to get help started for you right away.
We still don't know at this point if there is one suspect, multiple suspects. This was a drive-by shooting, so everything happened very fast.
We are 4 hours after the murder happened. We have video. We have a suspect vehicle.
They were at a loss as to why Jermaine would be targeted. He worked at a restaurant. He had a son, but there was nothing that would indicate that he would be the target of a homicide or a shooting.
I had set up the press conference for 5 o'clock, but I'm purposely going slow because I am waiting anxiously for that 5th surveillance team to get put in place.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, the first 48 hours of any homicide investigation are critical. So in 2018, when the city of Toronto experiences a surge of murders, detectives are pushed to the brink to make those hours count, especially on one summer day when a bold and reckless act of violence leaves one man dead and another on the run. Here now is Catherine McDonald with 4 little words.
I don't know where. August 22nd, 2018 was a Wednesday. Much like many other Wednesdays, working on other cases. Team 4 was on call, number 1, which meant the next homicide in the city of Toronto was going to be ours.
Emergency police, fire, or ambulance.
I don't know what happened. I was driving with a guy. We were on Western Road in Jane.
Okay.
And then I heard something boom. The bullet in the car.
At that time, I was a neighborhood officer at 12th Division, and that morning I was doing paperwork at the station. I have the radio beside me. I hear the call come over, I believe at 9:55 in the morning, of a shooting on Weston Road, and there's a vehicle stopped with somebody shot inside. That's kind of an all-hands-on-deck thing, so I went, grabbed some keys, grabbed a car, and hopped out on the road as quickly as I could. I got to the scene approximately 10 minutes after the call came over. There's a lot of uniformed officers there already. Western Road had been completely shut down. Some officers are talking to witnesses. Other officers are controlling traffic. So I started looking for video surveillance.
At 10:10 a.m., I received a call that there was a shooting in 12th Division. Multiple sounds of gunshot.
The information that was coming across quite quickly was that shooting happened as a result of a drive-by. One individual had been shot and was believed to be fatal.
We ensured that forensic identification services were notified, that the scene was secure, and that a canvass for witnesses and closed-circuit TV had started.
I was able to find a camera right there. There's a used car dealership. I saw the cameras pointing out to Western Road. I went inside right away. The cameras were working fine, and they captured a clear image of what took place. And what I saw was a light color SUV. It looked to be silver, possibly a light blue. I could tell that it was a Mazda CX-5 driving north on Jane Street.
The intersection of Jane and Weston is unusual. Even though they cross, because of their angles, they both run north-south.
It stops at the lights at Weston Road, and then it makes a right-hand turn. So now it comes south on Weston Road. It comes past the car dealership, and then it actually makes a U-turn, and you see a handgun emerge from the driver window of the car. And within seconds, then you see the white car that was passing stop in the middle of Weston Road. Then our SUV accelerates north and out of the picture.
Something puzzled him. When the suspect turned onto Weston, he was in front of the victim, who was stopped at a red light north of the intersection, about 5 cars back.
So I was having a hard time understanding how the suspect vehicle could have known the victim vehicle was where it was, if it was the target of the shooting. As the suspect vehicle comes down Weston Road and then makes a U-turn, there's no way it could have known where the victim vehicle was situated. So that part wasn't making sense to me. It looked like that gun came out at a specific time. Right before then you see a couple of taps of the brakes as well of the suspect vehicle, which would indicate that it's slowing down briefly.
Because it did, the license plate was mostly visible.
So I ran out to one of the police cars and I ran the partial license plate looking for a Mazda CX-5, and I located one.
The plate was CCBX444, and it was indeed silver.
It was registered to a rental car company in the northwest end of the city, not too far from where we're located at that time, maybe a 10-15 minute drive north.
I had received by 10:30 the name of the deceased, the fact that there was a passenger in the vehicle and that the passenger had been transported to 12th Division for an interview. The scene had been contained and that video canvas was already in the works, so we already had a suspect vehicle and a direction of travel.
The deceased was a 32-year-old man named Jermaine Titus. He had died of a single gunshot wound to the head as he was driving his car. The passenger beside him was unharmed.
After hanging up the phone, flurry of activity, doing all these database checks, putting together the best picture that we could, understand who the victim was and who the passenger was and what connection they might have to any criminality that might help explain why something like this could happen.
There's really nothing surfacing that would suggest that, you know, he's a gang member or something obvious that would indicate that he should be the target of a potential shooting. There's nothing of that sort that sticks out to us. By 11:40, Mike and I start making our way directly from headquarters to the scene.
It took approximately 30 minutes, and when we pulled up to the scene, it was as described.
Yeah, we were coming this way on Jane, and then we made a left onto Weston, and then we stopped pretty much right over here.
I think the scout car was set up right here.
Yeah.
I believe it was a Volvo that was facing this way on Weston.
Yeah.
And we had Jermaine Titus's vehicle, the Lexus, the white Lexus.
And I remember when I got here, I was scanning the area before we went into the crime scene tape. This is what concerned me here, is the backstop, the residential housing, and, you know, the original 911 call, potentially 3 shots.
This is about where
Jermaine's vehicle ended up.
Right here, yeah, right across these
kind
two
of in
lanes.
Front end of the vehicle, straddling both lanes at a 45-degree angle.
Looking in and seeing Jermaine in the vehicle and where the shot placement was on him. You remember thinking at first this was like an execution style, like there must have been
targeted hit.
Right.
It didn't look believable because 2 vehicles passing by at, 30, 40 kilometers an hour on a road, and somebody being able to drive one of those vehicles and shoot one-handed with a handgun out the window with any sort of precision on a person in a vehicle moving the other way, that doesn't seem possible. If I watched that in the movie, I wouldn't have believed it.
There was a round that had gone through the driver's side window. There was a heavy tint on it, so the window was intact, yet shattered, and the deceased was slumped over on the driver's side of the vehicle.
What I noticed was Jermaine Titus in the seat. It was reclined quite far back. It played into the way we were thinking. Like, here's a heavily tinted window, a shot through that window, a person leaned back quite far. I'm thinking, is it him that they're targeting? Is it the passenger they're targeting? The shooter would have had to have known who was in the car. So that is playing into my mind at the time.
We'd met with our forensic officers who had walked us through. There was a .45 caliber shell casing located at the scene, some bullet fragments. The original information is that there were 3 shots fired. Where did these extra rounds go?
Can you find someone, please? Okay, sir, listen, we're going to get help started for you right away. I got a few more questions, okay?
The passenger of Jermaine Titus's vehicle, he, from what I understand, when the officers arrived, was sitting on the curb, unbelievably distraught.
Sorry, I took his phone because he's very nervous and
Okay.
his son.
How old is the patient?
Sorry?
How old, the age of the person that was
How
shot?
old is he?
Tell me approximately.
He could not explain what happened, could not explain why it happened. He was covered in fluids as a result of the shooting. So he was brought to the station not only to provide him some help, but to give him a moment to gather his thoughts and then provide us with some information.
Investigators spoke with several witnesses at the scene and canvassed for more security footage, hoping to track where the suspect vehicle had fled.
John Barnes was able to identify very quickly that it was a rental and where this rental was from. When you have a lead like this, you run fast to chase it down.
Welcome back. 32-year-old Jermaine Titus was shot while driving in the morning rush hour by someone in a passing car. In less than an hour, police have identified the suspect's vehicle and are racing to find the killer. Here again is Catherine McDonald with 4 little words.
I asked a be on the lookout or a BOLO go out about the vehicle so that every police officer in Ontario would have that information, because we have someone who has shot what appears to be a completely innocent individual in the middle of the city, in the middle of rush hour, and I didn't know what they were capable of.
So we leave the scene shortly after 12 o'clock and we make our way to 12th Division.
Frankie's interview, he seems completely oblivious to what happened. I mean, there was no indication from the sounds of it that anything like this was about to happen.
We were briefed upon arriving by one of the Major Crime Unit investigators who had interviewed the passenger in the vehicle with the deceased.
Jermaine Titus was a friend of the passenger. Jermaine was driving his friend to work. There was nothing more than that.
Mr. Titus had picked him up with his 6-year-old son and had dropped off the son to school, and then the shooting happened shortly thereafter. Thank God the child wasn't in that car as well.
We still don't know at this point if there is one suspect, multiple suspects. This was a drive-by shooting, so everything happened very fast.
With the vehicle to try to get any CCTV footage.
I'm sitting there thinking, I have an individual who has shot somebody. How do I prove that it was that individual in the car and that person was alone?
They learn more from a witness who happened to be parking along Weston when the shooting occurred. Jermaine's car had come to a stop right in front of him. Less than a minute before, he had been cut off by the suspect vehicle when they both turned onto Weston at the same time from opposite directions. As he pulls to the curb lane, he sees the car make its U-turn, but looks away in order to park. He hears the shots fired and turns his head back just as it speeds away.
He got a good look at the driver of the suspect vehicle, and he was able to describe him with some degree of certainty with regards to skin tone, hair, but most importantly, was able to tell us that there was nobody else in the front seat of that car. We are 4 hours after the murder happened. We have video. We have a suspect vehicle. Evidence to prove that it was one individual. Shell casings. This case is coming together very quickly. Detective Sergeant Patterson.
Not long after, another revelation.
It's the guy from the rental agency.
Rental car company was extremely cooperative.
Buddy, there's video. Awesome. There's video and there's a contract. Okay.
By 2:20 that afternoon, we find out that the car had been rented out on August 18th, 2022. So 3-4 days prior, the car had been rented by a woman. But the person who had rented the car was not the one who paid for the vehicle. It was an independent third-party woman as well. And when the CCTV footage is reviewed, we've got a male and a female at the counter renting the vehicle. The male is on the video carrying a distinctive satchel across his body. Having been doing this for quite some time, I've been involved in a number of shootings and homicides where individuals are known to carry guns within these type of messenger bag satchels. So that was obviously a key thing for me. Staff had identified the female as the individual who filled out the contract and rented the vehicle. The male at that point in time is unknown to us.
Officers began background checks on the women and uncover a connection between the renter and a man named Shamoy Palmer.
And it turns out Shamoy has a criminal record with quite a bit of violence on it. And as we're hearing this, you start thinking, okay, is this a gang shooting? Is this an individual who was out in conflict with another gang member? But nothing that we could find on Jermaine Titus indicated that. So the why, still in the air. We didn't know.
One of the field investigators pulls a mugshot of Palmer.
And he was able to determine that the individual that was with the renter, the time of the vehicle being picked up, was Shamoy Palmer. We had a possible suspect.
Perfect. I'll send you an email right now and I'll send you all those particulars.
So we start researching where Shamoy might be. What addresses is he associated to?
The female who had rented the car was living in the east end of the city. I started organizing surveillance teams now to go to the address in the east end of the city. We started doing the same thing at multiple other areas. We identified that the person who had paid for the rental car was a woman by the name of Egypt Morgan. The investigative team had traced that credit card to an address that was 450 meters from the crime scene.
Investigators go to that apartment building and speak to the superintendent, who gives them access to the security footage.
The officer identified Egypt coming and going. He was able to back up and see her leaving just shortly before the murder.
And just prior to the homicide, they observed Shamoy Palmer wearing the same satchel, on the phone, running down the lobby, exiting the front lobby doors.
Exterior cameras caught him as he crossed the parking lot, racing out seconds later in the silver Mazda, making his way onto Jane Street northbound.
He's seen in the lobby at approximately 9:52, 9:53 a.m. The shooting, the first 911 calls at 9:55, so the time frame is very short.
So now I am hyper-focused on 55 Emmett. I have video evidence of who I believe to be Shamoy Palmer at that address, but I don't have any surveillance officers at this point to sit on that address.
As we're finding this out, we get a call from our same investigative team. They receive a call from the rental car company and the car had just been returned, and we're 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m. in the evening.
So an hour and a half before an individual had dropped off the CX-5, I sent the detective back there. He called me, said, yep, the vehicle's here. And sure enough, on video, there is an individual dropping off the CX-5 and using his elbow to close the driver door. Taking efforts to not leave fingerprints is the theory. The detective is able to clearly identify that it's Shamoy Palmer.
The video shows him exiting the parking lot onto the roadway, and now we've got a new area to start canvassing along to see if we can get last direction of travel and see if anyone had picked him up or if he'd gone into a cab or public transit.
I get a phone call a short time later from a very excited detective who says they have located a shell casing that is lodged on the windshield. Now we're looking for Shamoy Palmer. We have overwhelming evidence at this point to suggest he is the individual that pulled the trigger.
would think the main channel, the channel 1, can you check the video file for between 5 and 6 p.m. that day? We are reviewing CCTV footage. We're delegating tasks. Actually, isn't this the footage from the 7-Eleven?
I ask that undercover officers set up at all the different addresses that Chamoy has ever been associated to.
We really appreciate your help. We just don't want him to slip through our fingers here.
And now we're talking 7 or 8 hours after the actual murder. This is unheard of, but there was so much going on in the city at the time. Getting surveillance officers was really difficult. Detective Sergeant Patterson, we get most of the addresses covered, but not all. Black satchel.
Because of the public safety risk, we start pinging phones.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I think we got it.
Awesome. The number that we had for Chamoy Palmer, it had been off for a significant amount of time and was not showing any current location. Shortly after 7 p.m., we're confident with the identification of Mr. Titus, and Mike Patterson arranges for a sergeant to go and do the death notification to the family.
In the meantime, they make a critical call.
So clearly see it. Looks like the 8:05 that night, just 10 plus hours after the murder occurred, we informed all the officers that were assisting with monitoring the addresses of where Chamoy was, that he's arrestable on site for first-degree murder.
Detective Henkel. Yeah. We continued using confidential informants, our covert operations, whatever we could do to try to get him off the streets. The family eventually comes an hour or so later to 12 Division. As in any homicide, it's always obviously devastating and traumatic. There's always a little bit of denial, there's shock. They were at a loss as to why Jermaine would be targeted. He worked at a restaurant, he had a son, but there was nothing that would indicate that he would be the target of a homicide or a shooting.
Knowing in my head at that time that Chamoy Palmer was wanted for this murder, I could not reveal that to them at the time for the integrity of the investigation. As much as I would love to have looked Mom in the eyes and say, we're going to catch this person, I couldn't at that point.
As the manhunt continued, the address they were most interested in was the one where Egypt Morgan lived.
I was able to convince our surveillance team to sit on this address while we started working on a search warrant to search the apartment, which is where we believed that he would logically be staying. Whether he's there or not, we didn't know.
We wrapped up our day around midnight and got, I think, 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and then we resumed the following day back at 12th Division.
Detective Sergeant Patterson.
Still trying to find Palmer, the day begins with a trip to the courthouse to obtain a Canada-wide arrest warrant for him. Updates were also coming in from surveillance teams who had been working around the clock.
I am struggling to find resources again. What I have now is 5 addresses of where Chamoy could be. I could not determine with any certainty where Chamoy was, so I had to have them all covered. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was able to have 4 of the 5 addresses covered, but of course, the one at 55 Emmett, I was still struggling, and the team that was sitting there was exhausted.
Believing Palmer was still in the city, they began thinking of ways to flush him out.
From experience, we know that most people that commit crimes, they watch the news.
So they plan a live news conference. Minutes before it starts, Mike secures a team to cover Egypt Morgan's apartment, but they need time to get there.
I had set up the press conference for 5 o'clock. So I'm walking the media through the investigation. I'm making a plea for more witnesses, dash cams, anything that the community is willing to come forward with, but I'm purposely going slow. We're appealing to the public to assist in tracing the final 24 hours of Mr. Titus's life, because I am waiting anxiously for that 5th surveillance team to get put in place. And I have my phone on the podium and I see the message come. At about 20 after 5, I picked up the foam board of Chamoy Palmer's face and I put it on that easel, and I said something along the lines of, we have identified an individual responsible. He is now wanted for first-degree murder. And this is a reminder to those that may be harboring Mr. Palmer that you will also be investigated and you will be charged for accessory after the fact to murder.
Following the press conference, they reach out to surveillance teams, instructing them to start knocking on doors looking for Palmer.
We also had tasked our surveillance unit, who was sitting at the address on Emmett Avenue, to go and do the door knocking to arrest him on site if he was there. So those were instructions. I guess the tactic of the news conference had worked, because
at 5:43, so just a few minutes later, I get a very excited phone call from a detective at 12 Division who has Chamoy Palmer under arrest.
They never got a chance to get to the door. They observed Mr. Palmer exiting the lobby doors, getting into an Uber.
Gets jammed up in Toronto traffic. The surveillance team is desperately trying to get to him. They end up boxing the vehicle in and arresting Chamoy Palmer in the back of the Uber.
He had the satchel, some of the clothing he had been seen with earlier in the day, and a couple of cell phones, but no weapon at that time. He was transported to 12 Division. I had instructed the surveillance resources at the Emmett address to secure the apartment pending a search warrant.
I made sure to call Jermaine Titus's mother a few minutes before I did the media stand-up. Mr. Titus leaves behind his loving family and a 4-year-old son, to let her know that I was going to be presenting an update. The pleasure of calling her afterwards and telling her that he was under arrest was something that you can't describe as an investigator.
He wasn't interested in speaking with us. He said he had bigger concerns to deal with. I would disagree. When you're being charged with first-degree murder and your life is hanging in the wind, but didn't seem fazed. He said we'll be speaking with each other for a number of years, and wanted to go back to his cell.
The following day, they search Egypt Morgan's apartment.
It had quite a large living space and a red leather sectional couch and a massive TV on the wall. I can remember thinking, I wonder if my theory is correct. Is it the media that flushed out Chamoy Palmer? So I picked up the remote and turned on the TV, and sure enough, what was last seen was local media. Moments into the search, there was a particular officer that was looking at the cushions, pulling the cushions up, and then he got down on his hands and knees, and he looked under the couch, and he turns to me and he goes, "Sir, I think we got a gun."
It was a .45 caliber Parrott 1911 with a flashlight and a laser sight mounted to it.
I mean, there's no good reason to own this. It's illegal to own it in the first place, but my hopes were that this was the murder weapon.
Following the search warrant, Egypt Morgan was taken into custody on August 28th, and a number of firearm charges were laid. Then our investigation continues. We start working on getting the cell phones extracted, and within a week, we're on to our next homicide.
As the work of building the case against Chamoy Palmer begins, the big question remains.
We did ask him if he knew who Jermaine Titus was. He said he didn't know who that person was. So we know who we believe did it, but we don't know the motive for it and why. That doesn't come into play till about August of 2019.
After Palmer's arrest, police submitted several items for forensic testing to prove he was the shooter and hopefully shed light on a motive.
We've put requests in for gunshot residue on the clothing that Mr. Palmer was arrested in. We've requested DNA swabs to be examined from the suspect vehicle and the firearms as well.
There were also the phones. When Palmer was arrested, they had seized 2.
Hey guys, Palmer's phone extraction's back. The day of the murder, the morning of.
So in June 2019, the first thing I did was go to the phone log pre-murder, and there's a text exchange between Trapp, which we determined to be Palmer, and RB's was determined to be Egypt Morgan.
And it starts at 9:48 with baby, and he responds at the same time, "Yo,
She says, Skino is in 7-Eleven right now behind me. He responds, okay. Minutes later, she adds, he's waiting at the 35 going over the bridge.
She repeats that message at 9:54 because there's no response, I'm assuming.
She adds, blue sleeves.
And there is a bit of a gap in time. She repeats blue sleeves at 9:55.
And then finally, be careful.
So when you look at the last text message at 9:57, be careful, well, the shooting has already taken place.
After reading that text exchange, it dawned on me that Jermaine was never the intended target. We know Jermaine was not at the 7-Eleven. He wasn't in the area yet. So this Skino is the person who was the intended target. So we know Titus was in a car and he was never at 7-Eleven.
To people not familiar in the area, wouldn't mean very much. Yeah, so that's the 7-Eleven at Jane and Weston. It's right on the corner there. And then the 35 is the 35 bus. But having worked in the area for years, I know that's one of the bus routes. So to me, that's waiting for the bus at Jane and Weston. And knowing that now, we went back and looked at the video.
But from the scene itself, we don't know who Skino is. We don't see anyone with blue sleeves. So that leads me to reach out to our covert operations, and we are successful in identifying an individual who uses that street name, has a history with the police, drug convictions, possible gang affiliations. We're leading up now to the preliminary hearing and want to get him to court somehow. So we draft a subpoena up.
As they try to locate Skino, phone records reveal even more about Palmer's activities that day and Egypt Morgan's involvement.
About 10:15 or 10:17, he starts querying social media outlets, like news outlets, in order to find out what's going on.
At one point, Morgan sends a text joking about a mistaken news report saying, LOL, they said black Dodge car.
It dawns on him, he no longer wanted to text. He says, if anything, WhatsApp. On that WhatsApp exchange, he tells her, I returned the rental. And she responds, good, hot. And then she makes arrangements for him to get picked up from where he was in order to bring him back to her apartment.
A lot of the communication was with other identified people. He's looking for someone to rent a car for him. So he's looking for an exit plan.
Things go quiet for a while, until the next day, around the time of the police press conference.
At 5:06, Palmer misses a voice call, but then a text exchange happens, and Morgan says, baby, tell me what I need to do, please. My heart, right now, my sister's crib is always free for me. He responds, okay. She said, we can go, the door is open. He asks where. She provides him an address. Then she orders an Uber, tells him, go down the flight of stairs, and that's when the Uber comes.
So in the extract where he is taking an Uber to her sister's place, Palmer says, we need to talk, baby, and she says, okay, and he says, I'm a turn in, and she says, nah, bro, I can't do 2 Ubers at once, and he says, I'm not talking about Uber, going in, and she says, stop talking, dumb shit. So this is moments before he's arrested, and then he says, got pulled over just now, on God, and that's the last thing Palmer says, and she replies within seconds, nah, where, tell him cut, indicating like tell the Uber to try to evade the police that are pulling him over.
Since the murder, Egypt Morgan had been on house arrest on the original firearms charges. These texts tell them she was more involved in Jermaine's death than they had thought.
So post-murder, Palmer tells Morgan, I returned the rental, and she responded, good, hot. So she knew that was not good to be wheeling that around any further. And then after that, she sent an Uber to go pick him up. So that elevates Morgan's role in this.
Forensic tests were ongoing. A mixed DNA profile had been found in the car and on the gun and ammunition. DNA warrants were issued for both Palmer and Morgan. As investigators waited for the results, another piece of evidence emerged.
Hey Robin, come and see this. Look at this. One morning in August, I took the entire day to go through the cell phone extract.
That's gotta be the gun.
Approximately 40,000 images and a couple thousand video files. And on one of the files, I found a Snapchat, and it shows Shamoy Palmer standing in a hotel room holding a pistol at his side, and then he raises the pistol at the person holding the camera, filming the video, and he actually lights up. There's a spotlight and a laser sight that's on it, and there's a female heard in the background laughing. We now had a video of Palmer holding the murder weapon.
It was not the only thing tying him to the gun. Gunshot residue was found on his clothing, a very small amount, but the ballistics report and his DNA results erased any doubt that he was the shooter.
The gun itself came back as conclusive that it was the same gun. The shell casings matched forensically back to the shell casing found on the windshield and the shell casings found at the scene.
Palmer's DNA came back, and there was a match to the steering wheel, the gun, and the ammunition.
As they waited on Morgan's DNA results, investigators met with Crown attorneys to go over what they did have.
After reviewing all of the extraction reports and the cell phone information, she was rearrested because of her telling Palmer about the whereabouts of Skino and providing him assistance with trying to get away the day that he was arrested.
On September 16, 2019, Egypt Morgan was taken into custody and charged with conspiracy to commit an indictable offense, accessory after the fact to murder, and failure to comply with the conditions of house arrest.
The very next day, on the 17th, is when we get the DNA report back with her DNA on the firearm, the magazine, and the ammunition. We then consulted with Crown attorneys, and after a discussion with them, we decided to upgrade the charges to first-degree murder.
Even though they knew Skino was the intended target, they still didn't understand why Jermaine was the one Palmer shot at.
We are now coming close to the preliminary hearing, which is scheduled for October of 2019. And while we were prepping one of the witnesses who was at the scene, we actually put the CCTV footage of the shooting and where this witness was up on a 60-inch screen TV. The Crown and I look at each other because in high definition on the screen, we see an individual running between two houses with blue sleeves.
Welcome back. At the time Jermaine Titus was shot, police believed he'd been targeted, but didn't know why. 10 months later, investigators learned the real target was a man known as Skino. What they couldn't do was place him at the scene until just as the case is about to head to court. Here now is Catherine McDonald with a conclusion of 4 little words.
We were reviewing this video with a witness, and as we're playing it, you see the bus making a turn. You see our suspect right now making a right turn onto Weston Road, and that person in the center image takes notice of the person in the SUV and will start walking towards us. And as he's doing that, you start seeing the distinctive blue sleeves here. And the Crown and I looked at each other going, oh my God, this is Skino. He's been there the whole time. And he is actually the same person that ducks in between the two homes, which we thought initially it was somebody running for cover when the shots rang out. You can see that as Shamoy Palmer is driving the SUV back the other way and the shots ring out, they're aligned with where Skino is. And poor Jermaine Titus happened to just be driving by at the same time and was accidentally struck.
Skino did turn up to the court the very first day for the preliminary hearing, and he did not want to participate with the proceedings.
I ask him if he knows Jermaine Titus. He doesn't know who Jermaine Titus is. When I ask him if he knows Shamoy Palmer, he denies knowing who this person is. Then I show him the surveillance photos. He confirms that's him. He said he had just dropped off his kid at school and was just taking the bus because he doesn't drive, and that's why he was at the bus stop. He confirmed he was in the 7-Eleven prior to. He's confirming little bits and pieces, but denying any knowledge of Mr. Palmer. I asked him if he was the target of that shooting. Initially he denied it. Then I asked him why he was going in between the homes. He says he has friends in the area. So we were playing a cat and mouse game. So the good things that came out of it is he confirmed his identity, identified who he was on the photos. So now we have who we believe was the intended victim. and we're able to confirm that Mr. Titus was just an unfortunate victim of a random act of violence.
The trial for Shamoy Palmer and Egypt Morgan began in September 2022. In her opening address, the Crown Prosecutor told the jury that Shamoy Palmer was the gunman and that his girlfriend, Egypt Morgan, sent him a text message just before the shooting, putting the plan in motion.
Egypt Morgan, at the time of the murder, was 18 years old. Just living life, going to work every day, really just a regular girl.
No connections with police, no indications that she would have any affiliations to any criminality.
At the trial, the Crowns were able to establish that Egypt Morgan knew that Palmer was looking for Skino, that Palmer had access to his gun, and that some harm would befall Skino.
Once the Crown rested their case, the defense lawyer for Egypt Morgan decided to put his client on the stand.
Egypt Morgan testified that she and Palmer never had the intent together to cause bodily harm or cause death to anyone. Morgan admitted Palmer had asked her to let him know if she ever saw Skino, though she didn't know why. She said later that day Palmer told her he wanted to switch things up to find a cheaper rental car. She told the jury she was unaware Shamoy Palmer had discharged a firearm. She only realized what had happened the following day when she saw Palmer's face on TV while she was out getting her hair done.
She was downplaying their relationship and how much he had meant to her, that she had put the whole thing past her and didn't really care too much for him any longer. So in November 2022, the trial was still going on. They were working on closing arguments. I received an email to contact somebody from corrections.
It came to light that Egypt Morgan was sending Shamoy Palmer letters in jail in spite of their court order not to communicate. Some of the writings were about her own testimony.
Cell searches were done and almost a dozen letters were seized, but they were not immediately introduced at court.
We can't determine 100% that it's from Morgan. Further investigation needed to be done. So everyone was fine to let that investigation happen naturally, and they would continue on with the closings, the verdict, address that as a side issue.
On December 1st, the jury found Shamoy Palmer guilty of first-degree murder.
That's an automatic 25-year sentence with no eligibility of parole until after 25. Jermaine Titus's family was present every single day for that trial. It's a long journey. It's bittersweet.
He went out that day with the intentions of killing someone, and the life he took was the life of my son. Innocent.
You know, you just feel very vulnerable and very nervous and very apprehensive about where you are, who's around you.
I also find that when I drive, I'm constantly looking and observing my surroundings, listening deeply for any, loud, impactful bangs, maybe reflective of possibly a gunshot.
Despite facing the same charge, Egypt Morgan was found guilty of manslaughter.
I believe it was tough for a jury to convict an 18-year-old young woman at the time for sending texts to the person who ultimately shot and killed the person. She was culpable, but to send Morgan to prison for the rest of her life from a text would be a little difficult to do.
Though Palmer's sentence was automatic, it would be almost another year before Morgan received hers.
It took a while because there was submissions made about what was contained in those letters.
The letters were basically her talking about how she would account for certain issues and certain questions that she was going to face when she took the stand. And then there were lots of other letters expressing her plans to continue the relationship with Palmer after they, hopefully, in her mind, got past this trial.
The sentencing didn't come back until October of 2023, and Morgan received a sentence of 10 years for manslaughter. And I believe that those letters led to that 10-year sentence. Yes, she sent texts. If it was not for those texts, the sequence of events would not have happened. That's one thing. Don't be on the stand, swear, and lie.
I don't know that she understood the seriousness of what she was doing. She was a young person. I think she was just in love with Shamoy. And I think that misguided her loyalties. She received the penalty she deserved. She started a series of events that caused the death of an innocent person.
4 little words was all it took.
Jermaine Titus was an upstanding citizen, an individual who worked, took care of his child, had a loving family. There was nothing to indicate that he was anything more than an upstanding citizen and contributor to society. And that just added to the tragedy that much more. He's a good person, one that will be very much missed by his family.
We spoke to the Titus family, but they did not wish to participate in this episode. Still serving his life sentence, Shamoy Palmer won't be eligible for parole until 2043. As for Egypt Morgan, her firearms charges were stayed. When she was sentenced for manslaughter, she had already served over 4 years. After receiving additional credits, she will be released in August 2027. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat